There is a stranger living inside you. It thinks your thoughts before you do. It feels the rage you swear you never feel, desires the things you would never admit to wanting, and it has been walking 3 steps behind you since you were a child. Carl Jung gave this stranger a name. He called it the shadow, and learning to face it may be the single most important thing you ever do. We spend our entire lives looking outward. We study the stars, map the oceans, dissect the atom. And yet the one territory almost none of us dares to enter is the one closest to home, the dark, unlit country of our own psyche. The part of us we refuse to look at. The part we are certain we are not. This is the story of that hidden self. Where it comes from, why it grows, what happens when we ignore it, and the strange, almost alchemical truth that the very thing we are most ashamed of may turn out to hold our greatest gold. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung spent the latter half of his life mapping the unconscious, that vast, submerged ocean of the mind beneath the small, lit island of waking awareness. On that island stands the ego, the part of you that you know, the self you present to the world, the voice that says I. But the island is tiny, and everything the ego cannot accept about itself, every impulse, every feeling, every trait that does not fit the picture we have decided to call me, gets pushed off the edge, down into the dark water. That submerged material does not disappear. It collects, it organizes. Over the years, it takes on a kind of life of its own. Jung called this accumulation the shadow, the disowned half of the personality, the sum of everything we have refused to be. And here is the first thing almost everyone gets wrong about it. We hear the word shadow and we picture something sinister, a monster, a demon, the devil crouching inside us. We assume the shadow is the bad part, the dangerous part, the part that must be locked away and never let out. But this is a misunderstanding. The shadow is not the evil in you. The shadow is simply the hidden in you. It is morally neutral. It is the warehouse of everything that did not make the cut, and what gets stored there depends entirely on what you decided, early in life, to leave out. Consider a person who has built their whole identity around being gentle, agreeable, endlessly accommodating. Someone who has never raised their voice, never demanded anything, never made a scene. Their shadow will not be more gentleness. Their shadow will hold the opposite, the buried aggression, the unspoken anger, the capacity to say no that they amputated long ago in order to be liked. Now consider the reverse, a hardened person, cynical and cold, who treats tenderness as weakness. Their shadow is not more cruelty, their shadow is the soft thing they buried, the vulnerability, the longing to be cared for, the gentleness they could not afford to show. The shadow always carries what the conscious personality lacks. It is the missing half. It exists to restore balance, to hold in the dark everything we exiled from the light. And that is why it can never simply be destroyed or discarded. It is not an enemy at the gate. It is a piece of you standing just out of sight, waiting. We are not born with a shadow. We are born whole. Watch a very young child, and you will see the entire human range expressed without apology. Fury and delight, greed and generosity, cruelty and tenderness, all of it flowing freely, none of it hidden. The child is not yet divided. There is no mask, because there is nothing yet to hide. And then the long process begins, the process we call growing up, and that Jung more pointedly called the splitting of the self, because to live among other people, a child must learn the rules. Some things are praised, other things are punished, shamed, met with cold silence or a turned back. Don't be selfish, don't cry, don't be so loud, don't be a coward, good boys don't, nice girls won't. And slowly the child learns to perform the acceptable self and to bury everything that earned disapproval. This is not a failure of parenting, it is the price of civilization itself. Every culture is a vast machine for shaping raw human nature into something it can use, and that shaping always requires cutting away. The traits we cut do not vanish, they sink, they become the shadow. But here is the cruelest part of the arrangement, and the part almost no one expects. It is not only our ugliness that we bury, we also bury our brightness. A child who is gifted, intense, radiant in some way the family cannot handle learns to dim themselves. Don't show off. Who do you think you are? Stop dreaming. And so ambition, talent, passion, originality, pure gold, gets exiled into the dark right alongside the rage and the greed. The shadow ends up holding not just the worst of us, but a great deal of the best of us, the unlived life, the person we might have been. Jung observed something that should stop us cold. People will fight harder to keep their buried greatness hidden than to keep their buried darkness hidden. It is one thing to admit you can be petty, or jealous, or cruel. It is something else entirely, something terrifying, to admit that you are capable of more than the small life you have settled for. To own the gold in the shadow means accepting a responsibility most of us would rather refuse. So we leave it buried and call it modesty. If the shadow is, by definition, the part of you that you cannot see, Tiny, then how would you ever find it? You cannot find it by introspection alone, because the moment you can clearly see a trait in yourself and talk about it openly, it is no longer in shadow. It has come into the light. The true shadow is precisely what remains invisible to you. But there is a back door, and almost everyone walks through it every single day without realizing. The mechanism is called projection. When we cannot tolerate something in ourselves, the psyche performs a sleight of hand. It takes that disowned material and hangs it on someone else. We do not experience our own buried trait. We experience it out there in another person, where we are free to judge it, hate it, condemn it. This is why the surest map to your own shadow is your own list of irritations. Think of the person who fills you with disproportionate contempt, not mild dislike, that hot, irrational charge of how dare they, the arrogant colleague, the needy friend, the selfish stranger, the qualities that genuinely enrage you in other people, far out of proportion to anything they have actually done to you, are very often the qualities you have most furiously denied in yourself. The intensity is the tell. We are not usually enraged by what is foreign to us. We are enraged by what is intimate and forbidden, the thing we are most afraid we secretly are. The shy man who seethes at someone showing off is meeting his own buried desire to be seen. The rigidly disciplined woman who is disgusted by someone lazy and indulgent is meeting her own starved longing to rest. Our judgments are confessions. The shadow announces itself in the very things we are most certain have nothing to do with us. Now scale this up. If one person can take their disowned darkness and pin it onto another, then so can a family, so can a tribe, so can an entire nation. This is the most dangerous psychological phenomenon there is, and history is essentially a record of it. A people who cannot bear to see their own capacity for cruelty find a group to carry it for them. An enemy, a scapegoat, an outsider, declared to be the source of all evil. They get to remain pure in their own eyes precisely because all the darkness has been exported onto someone else. And then, in the name of fighting that darkness, they unleash exactly the cruelty they swore they did not have. The collective shadow does not stay quiet. It returns as war, as persecution, as the slow poison of contempt between groups. Open any news feed and you are looking in large part at humanity's refusal to own its own darkness, millions of people insisting the evil is entirely out there, in them, never in us. Which is why Jung made a claim that sounds almost grandiose until you sit with it. That the great moral work of our age is not political, but psychological. That the war that matters most is not the one out there, but the one each of us refuses to face within. Take the darkness back. Carry your own shadow. Stop handing it to strangers. It is the only thing that actually reduces the sum of darkness in the world, because the darkness you own is darkness no longer aimed at anyone else. To understand why the shadow behaves the way it does, picture an old playground seesaw. On one end sit all the traits you have decided are good and acceptable, the qualities you display proudly to the world. On the other end sit the forbidden traits, the ones you have pushed down into the shadow. And here is the law that governs the whole apparatus, the law most of us spend our lives pretending does not exist. The seesaw must balance. You cannot simply pile weight onto the good side forever. Every time you press harder into virtue, more saintly, more patient, more selfless, more in control, an equal weight gathers on the dark side to match it. The psyche, like the body, insists on equilibrium. Your body holds its temperature within a tiny range whether you think about it or not. The psyche does the same with its opposites. It will be balanced. This is why the person who strains hardest to be perfectly good is so often the one who erupts most spectacularly. The relentlessly patient parent who suddenly screams. The disciplined, controlled professional who detonates in some private way that shocks everyone, including themselves. The weight they refused to acknowledge on one side came crashing down on the other at the worst possible moment in the ugliest possible form. The energy had to go somewhere. They simply never chose where. And if you load the seesaw too heavily on both ends, if the inner tension grows great enough that the whole structure can crack at the center. That cracking is what we call a breakdown. So the goal cannot be to win the battle, to defeat the dark side and live forever on the bright end. That position is unstable. It cannot hold. The only stable place, the only sane place, is the center point. The fulcrum where the opposites are held together consciously in balance. That balance point is not a grey compromise. It is, surprisingly, the place of the greatest aliveness. But we will come to that. There is a practical cost to all of this that you may have felt without ever understanding. Keeping the shadow buried takes enormous energy. Repression is not free. It is a constant, exhausting muscular effort to hold a part of yourself underwater. And the bigger the shadow grows, the more of your vitality goes into the holding. This is why so many people feel chronically tired, flat, lifeless, going through the motions of a life that should be full, but somehow isn't. A great portion of their fire is locked away, spent entirely on the work of suppression. And so the counterintuitive truth, a genuine, honest confrontation with your shadow, does not deplete you. It floods you with energy. The fire you were using to hold the lid down becomes fire you can finally use to live. People who do this work often describe it not as becoming darker, but as suddenly becoming alive, present, vivid, capable of passion they had assumed was simply gone. The energy was never gone. It was just locked in the basement. So what does it actually mean to own your shadow? Let us be clear about what it is not. It does not mean acting it out. Owning your capacity for rage does not mean unleashing rage on everyone around you. Owning your shadow is not a license to behave badly and call it authenticity. That is just the seesaw crashing down the other way. But it also does not mean suppression, clamping the lid down harder, which is exactly what created the problem. Real shadow work lives in a narrow, demanding middle path, to consciously acknowledge the disowned material, to feel it fully and admit it honestly, and then to give it expression in a form that does not damage your life or the people in it. To bring the buried trait up into the light, look it in the face, and find an outlet for its energy that is symbolic, creative, or controlled rather than destructive. The healthy cultures of the past understood this instinctively. They built it into the calendar, festivals where the ordinary order was inverted, rituals of fasting and feasting, of mourning and wild celebration, ceremonies that gave the dark side its due in a contained, sacred, communal way, so it would not have to claim its due by ambush. We have largely lost these forms, and we pay for the loss privately, each of us forced to invent our own. A ritual does not have to be grand. The principle is that a symbolic act, performed with full attention and real feeling, satisfies the psyche almost as much as the literal thing. Write down the shadow material, the resentment, the forbidden wish, the buried truth, and then burn the page. Pour the energy into hard, physical effort, into art, into a private act that means something to you. The unconscious does not distinguish sharply between the symbol and the deed. Honored deliberately, the shadow becomes an ally that backs you. Ignored, it becomes a force that runs you. There is something almost comic in how much raw power lives in this buried material. We invest our forbidden impulses with an intensity we never give to the polite, permitted parts of life, which is exactly why a frustrated, half-suppressed person can radiate a charge you can feel across a room. The energy is real. The only question is whether you direct it or it directs you. Here we arrive at the deepest layer of the whole matter, and the most liberating. Most human suffering comes from being torn between two things that seem to cancel each other out. I want this, but I also want its opposite. I should do the disciplined thing, but I long to do the indulgent thing. I am good, and yet I am capable of terrible things. We experience this as contradiction, and contradiction is unbearable. It feels like being pulled apart, like a question with no answer, a problem with no solution. The mind locked in pure contradiction can do nothing at all. It cannot move forward and it cannot rest. This paralysis is the root of an enormous amount of psychological misery. But there is another way to hold two opposing truths, and it changes everything. Jung and the whole mystical tradition before him called it paradox. Contradiction says one of these must be false. Paradox says both of these are true, and I will give each its full dignity, and I will hold them together without resolving them into one. The shift from contradiction to paradox is not an intellectual trick. It is a leap of consciousness, or it's the single most important leap a human being can make. It is the difference between being torn apart by your opposites and being held together by them. And once you make that leap, you discover something startling, that opposition was an illusion all along. Day has no meaning without night. There is no up except in the presence of down. Rest is only real because there is effort. Joy only registers against sorrow. The opposites do not destroy each other. They define each other. They need each other to exist at all. To advance from quarreling with this fact to embracing it is to move from torment into something close to peace. This is why fanaticism, of every kind, is always a symptom of the same disease. The fanatic has seized one half of a truth and is spending a furious, brittle energy keeping the other half at bay. The rage of the true believer is the sound of a person frantically holding down their own shadow. The endless need to be right is the tell. Wholeness has no such need. There is an old symbol for all of this, far less known than the famous circle, the mandala, that image of wholeness and unity. The symbol we need here is called the mandala. Picture two circles side by side. Now slide them together until they overlap. In the middle, where they cross, an almond-shaped sliver appears, belonging to both circles and to neither. That sliver is the mandala, and it represents nothing less than the overlap of the opposites, the precise place where what we call light and what we call dark begin to touch. This is the central revelation, and it is easy to miss, so hear it plainly. The healing does not come from the light circle. It does not come from defeating the dark circle and living purely in the bright one. The healing happens in the overlap, in that thin almond of space where the two meet and are, briefly, the same thing. The place where light and dark touch is the most profound religious experience a human being can have. We desperately want our stories to be about good triumphing over evil. But the deeper truth the great myths keep pointing to is stranger, that good and evil are finally transcended, that the two circles are revealed to have been one circle the whole time, and that what looked like a war was only the optical illusion of a self that had not yet learned to see itself as whole. To make a mandala in the privacy of your own inner life, to take two things in yourself that have been at war and hold them gently in the same space until they begin to overlap, is, the tradition insists, an act whose effect reaches far beyond you. When people asked Jung whether humanity would survive its own darkness, his answer never changed. It depends on whether enough individuals are willing to do the inner work. Every person who owns their own shadow adds a little less darkness to the world's great shared reservoir of it. The work is private. The consequence is not. So let us end where this leaves us. The goal of a human life in this understanding is not perfection. Perfection is the seesaw piled hopelessly onto one end, unstable, lifeless, doomed to crash. The goal is something different and far more difficult. The goal is wholeness. Wholeness means owning the entire self, the gold and the dross, the saint and the sinner, the gentle and the savage, the parts you are proud of and the parts you have spent your whole life pretending are not there. It means coming home to the complete human being you were before the world taught you to cut yourself in half. Not a one-sided goodness that is bloodless and afraid of life, but the full, vivid, paradoxical aliveness of a person who has stopped fighting themselves. The stranger walking 3 steps behind you was never your enemy. It was the rest of you, everything you exiled in order to be acceptable, everything you buried in order to belong. It has been waiting patiently in the dark, holding your missing half and a great deal of your unlived gold, waiting for the day you finally turn around. That turning is the whole of the work. It is uncomfortable. It is humbling. It asks you to admit things about yourself that you would rather take to the grave. And it is, in the end, the only road to becoming a whole human being. Turn around, meet the stranger, own your own shadow,